All right, well, hi, everybody. My name is David Palmer. I'm the chair of NCA's Activism and Social Justice Division, and we want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us in this timely and vital webinar. To state the obvious, we all currently live in charged and fractured times, a fact that's especially relevant for those of us who teach with activism and social justice sensibilities, where we examine in class vital topics about which people are very passionate, which is good. As such, we thought it would be helpful to generate a webinar that explores how to manage charged classroom conversations. In doing so, we hope will better prepare us to effectively manage these conversations as activism and social justice teachers and as any kind of teacher. I want to give a quick thank you to Yanti Friesum at Columbia College, who helped spark this event but couldn't join us due to professional commitments. And also, just to state the obvious, we're recording this webinar and we'll post it to YouTube in the not too distant future. And so I'm very honored to introduce you to the panel that will be speaking today. And can I say up front that I'm extremely grateful for the hard work these scholars and professionals have put into engineering this webinar. So we have with us today the coordinators of the webinar, Assistant Professor Nicole Allen, who is at Utah State University. We also have Associate Professor Mary Beth Held, who is at West Virginia University at Parkersburg. We also have Postdoctoral Research Associate Meredith Pruden, who's at Center for Information Technology and Public Life at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And we're also pleased to have some guests, one of who is Mary Beth's brother. The first one is Mr. Tinh Dong. Tinh graduated from the Master of Social Work program at West Virginia University. He's presently a psychotherapist at Saigon Psych Hub in Vietnam. Prior to returning to the US, he worked as a well-being counselor at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Vietnam. He used to serve as a mental health therapist for Valley Healthcare System in Morgantown, West Virginia, and the Quinn Curtis Center for Psychology Training, Service, and Research at West Virginia University. He's had opportunities to work with people of diverse backgrounds, including young children, adolescents, college students, adults, seniors, couples, families, addicts, and members of the LGBTQIA+ culture. And aside from psychotherapy, he has been working as a teacher of English since 2008. So thank you, Tinh, for joining us. And Mr. Matthew Held, Mary Beth's brother. Matthew graduated from the Master of Social Work program at West Virginia University. He's presently a psychotherapist at the Morgantown Pastoral Counseling Center in Morgantown, West Virginia. He had experience working with students having conduct issues at the Office of Student Counsel at West Virginia University. Besides working in the mental health field, he's been an active community organizer for 22 years and has led efforts to revitalize neighborhoods and communities in Morgantown, where the university resides. Matthew is a professional bassoonist and is looking for ways to integrate his love of music with his practice of social work. So, Matthew, we very much appreciate you being here as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth at this time.
You're muted, Mary Beth.
I see that.
It's the disease.
Yes, thank you, David, and thank you for reminding me about my mute. So thank you, David, for introducing everyone, and it's been a pleasure to work with Nicole and Meredith to put this together. I feel honored to have the opportunity to do so. So the first thing that we'd like to do today in our webinar is to have our guests, Matthew and Tinh, share with us some of the strategies that we can use in the classroom to help de-escalate those moods that occur that can create a whole lot of tension, elicit some kind of negative emotional response that we can, as faculty or facilitators in the classroom, help de-escalate and make it a productive, constructive conversation rather than it continuing to spiral downwards into a very awkward or maybe even hostile. hostile environment. So Matthew or Tin, you can share. Yeah.
So I think well, Matt and I decided that Matt would talk more because he's involved in the teaching environment, working environment in America recently more than me. So Matt will present the basic idea, and if there is any points that I want to chime in, share more perspective with you guys, and I would do the same. So I would give the stage to Matt.
Okay, thank you everybody for having us here to talk to you today. I see that we are speaking in front of a very qualified bunch of people. I'm sure you've all got very diverse backgrounds and have a lot to, probably we're going to cover some stuff that's going to be familiar to you. As a social worker, I sort of view my field as we are a doing field. That's what we specialize in primarily. And what we do to help us in our activity is draw on many other disciplines, a lot of other fields of study to come up with solutions for problems in the practical world. And when this topic was presented to me by Mary Beth, I first came to mind to me was how social workers frequently find ourselves needing to discuss or lead group therapy sessions. Those group therapy sessions could be just on about anything that was needed at the time. And oftentimes those sessions focus deliberately on extremely difficult topics. Those topics could be, in a support group, for example, could be trauma, talking about how people have survived from rape or domestic violence or a whole host of unsavory things. It could even be, we could be leading support groups for new mothers, which is sort of a happy topic that is also fraught with lots of anxiety and controversies of its own. So we never know from time to time what context we're going to find ourselves in. So we take a very general approach in the field. And we draw upon as many resources as we can find. So what I thought would be an interesting question to pose is, could group therapy be an evidence-based approach to classroom management? Because a lot of these basic principles come from all these different disciplines, and I'm sure you'll hear us talk about some bona fide communications theories and concepts because we use those without shame. The communication world gives us a lot of great insight into how to deal with complex situations. But our experience from the psychology side of things helps us deal with the individuals in our groups. And when we lead group therapy, we take a very systems-based approach to it, looking at the group as a system. And in this case, maybe looking at your classroom as a group system. And I would say the model of group that we would be talking about here, this would be an educational group. So we often talk about open and closed groups, self-help groups, support groups, educational groups, whatever kind of group you can think of in social work. And in this case, an educational group, probably, maybe among other things. Some of these things may cross over. Now, my life is a study in multiple disciplines. You can see I'm sort of new into the social work field, only having recently graduated with my master's. But previous to that, I had my undergraduate was in music, and after that, I was deeply involved in community planning in Morgantown, and that had presented me with a whole bunch of diverse community groups to have to always be leading meetings on. I always found myself in a position of meeting leading. And we talked about all kinds of controversial things, from human rights statements by the city, ordinances that the creation of ordinances and policy that we had to come together on to create for different movements and so forth in the city. So you can find yourself in the line of fire in a moment's notice. You never know who's going to come to your public meeting with this or that controversy du jour. And it sounds like that's what you guys are wanting to sort of dive into in your classrooms, but there might be a little bit of apprehension that things could get a little unruly. And well, you're probably correct. Things probably could and probably will get a little unruly. So what I'm going to maybe talk about now is some things and some organizational strategies that may help assuage that anxiety. And I would probably, in my experience with leading controversial groups, is to make sure from the very beginning, from the very first meeting, that you set a really good precedent and organize what the expectations and what the group is going to be like from the very beginning. So planning on the front end is key. And you probably know that. That's the syllabus activity of creating a class, setting up your policies for that class. But maybe you need almost, if you're going to embark on controversial topics, you may need maybe a mini syllabus that governs 2 days' topics. And so that would be kind of like establishing group work in social work. So the first thing you want to do, obviously, is consider the formatting of the group. And you're going to want to establish your group's purpose. You're going to want to establish the goals for the day. And you're going to want to determine what kind of group this is going to be. And in this case, an educational group. And you're going to also want to say, is there a need for this group? What need does this group activity we're about to embark on, this group discussion, what purpose does it serve? Is there a need for it in my class in this case? So once you've kind of answered those questions for yourself, you can move on to the most important part, and that's establishing what the group leadership is going to be like and what roles are you going to give to the people in your group. You're going to want to define the group's structure. You're going to want to identify roles for the group members. You're going to want to identify roles for the group leader. You're going to want to clearly state those. You use very, very simple and short statements. You're going to want to clearly establish the rules and the expectations of behaviors. When I sit down in front of a new group, and I know it's going to be controversial, I try to boil those rules and standards down to absolute shortest state and most concise statements that I possibly can. When you do that, the group is going to get the gist of them a lot quicker, and they're going to be easier to reference in real time as you're working in the group. So short and concise is very key here. You've got to almost meet the people in your group where they are in how you speak to them. So this is not a time to bring out well-worded and lengthy syllabus statements. This is a time to boil them down into something that people are going to get quickly. This is a practical set of rules to use in real time. And those rules should be derived from your syllabus and your university or institution's policies. You're going to want to create, so the third thing we would do in creating and setting up a group, we're going to want to also, before we start this, we're going to want to create for ourselves as the group leader and a set of assessment metrics so we can monitor the group's practice over time and in real time. We're going to want to assess to see what the group will form alliances within itself. We're going to want to assess those. We're going to want to understand them. Or we're going to want to assess, is the group maintaining a strong and central sense of cohesion? We're going to want to assess what the group norms are that become established. And are they being upheld? Are the group norms being upheld and stuck to? Consistency is really important here. And we're going to want to notice what the group's patterns are so that we can make adjustments in real time and over time. And once we have how we're going to assess this, we can actually get into running the group. So you're going to want to lead the group according to your plan. And you're going to want to stick to that plan. That helps establish consistency and predictability. That helps bring comfort and ease to the group, that the members in it can count on that predictability being there. So you're going to want to follow that plan. You're going to want to develop content and activities for the group that you are able to explain competently, clearly, right from the beginning. You need to keep the air of confidence to yourself as the leader. Obviously, and this is all you guys. You're going to want to use good communication skills and techniques. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next thing I'll talk about. But you want to also identify and name and address the ruptures within the group in real time as soon as they happen. As soon as a controversy comes up or a rupture, what we will refer to it as in a group occurs, don't let that linger along. People end up ruminating and festering on a rupture, and that causes a lingering stress to keep going, escalating things. So you want to be aware of those, be very conscious of them happening, address them immediately when they happen. And you're going to always want to ensure a feeling of safety for everybody in the group, including yourself as the leader.
I wanna share a little bit in here. So since Matt just mentioned, all of the necessary steps that you guys need to have in order to form a group, there's also one more thing that we need to pay attention to, which everybody is interested in. I think that would be the topics. So normally you would have a lot of topics that you want your class to discuss. But as like for today's topic, if we pick a topic or an issue that can cause a charged discussion or conversation or heated environment in the classroom, then that is something that we need to be really aware of. So, I think after you decide a topic that you want your class to discuss about, we need to consider possible sources of student viewpoints, during the preparation before the discussion. So we need to understand that, students' viewpoints may be wrapped up in their personal identities, influenced by their family members, religion, spiritual practice, or their moral belief. And also, so any ideas, any topics, that are challenging can be not a challenge to also themselves, but also to many groups, many social groups that they are involved in. So I think in order to consider possible viewpoints from students carefully, from the psychological point of view, mindfulness is something that we need to we can practice, as professor. So we need to firstly look into ourselves first, after we pick the topic. So we need to see if if ourselves we can handle that topic very well. Can we be neutral or not? There are several, because we know that with controversial topics there would be millions of opinions, and they could be all conflicting to each other, and of course it'll be very easy for us to bias some of them. So there are some questions that we need to ask ourselves first during the preparation for the class discussion. So the first one could be, can you remain calm when other people say things about this topic that you personally dislike? Next would be, can you comfortably accept when students reach different conclusions on the topic than the one that you might have reached, or you might accept it before? Next would be, do you become emotionally when you're having a hard time explaining why you think another person's point of view is wrong? And have you ever lashed out to another person during an argument? Since being a group moderator or a professor in a class, we need to do this first. We need to look back into ourselves first and see how our reacting and responding tendency is before we actually take the role of being a mediator in the classroom to create peace for everybody. So I think that's one thing that I would like to share, which is about mindfulness. Be aware of how you are, be aware of how your students may react, and be ready to maintain to adopt the how do you say it um, to take the role of the moderator so that you don't bias anything. Yeah. So another thing is there is one thing in psychology that we want everybody to know, and as a professor or a group um, leader, you should also know about this, which is called cognitive distortions, or basically mistakes in thinking. So cognitive distortions are basically biased perspectives that we as human take on ourselves and the world around us. So they are irrational thoughts and beliefs that we unknowingly reinforce over time. There are many patterns of them, but there are several patterns that I would want to mention here, so that everybody is aware of them. Because these cognitive distortion thinkings, basically, they are already embedded into people's habit, and it causes their reaction to be very quick, very fast, and that can contribute to make the conversation in the classroom heated up. So the first distortion pattern would be all or nothing thinking. So it has to be black or white, right or wrong. There's nothing in between. The second one is overgeneralization. So basically, students can take things very personally, and they can use just one idea from the professor or from any students and think that that idea is generalized for everything happening around them. Mental filter, which means that students, when they come to class to attend your topic, and they already have in mind something that they want to hear. And if they hear something that is not the same as what they expected, they're going to feel really upset. Jumping into conclusion. So this happened a lot of times when students hear something different from their own points of view, then they would think that other people may not be respecting them, or things are going to happen really bad because they feel like other people are dominating them in ideas, or there are a bigger population of students in the class having share the same mutual opinion compared to theirs. Next would be similar to jumping into conclusion, which is catastrophizing. So for some reason, students don't pay attention that this is just a discussion in class. They bring too much of themselves and their belief into the classroom, and they think that they have to advocate for themselves to make things right and wrong in the classroom atmosphere. But they forgot the nature of the activity is just a discussion. It's just supposed to be for everybody to hear more different opinions. So sometimes if they hear something, kind of extreme or radical from other people, they feel threatened. They have fear, and they would think that after stepping out from the classroom, their life is going to become miserable right away, and that, of course, is not correct. The next one would be personalization, which means that everybody, from the opinions that everybody share, some students may think that those apply to them, and they may have different kind of emotion or reaction depending. So they can become very sad, very depressed, or they can become very angry and aggressive, based on the traumas or bad experience that they had in the past. So mindfulness and cognitive distortions are something in the psychology field that I would like you guys to maybe look into, understand them when you guys are preparing for your group or class discussion. All right, I would give the stage back to Matt.
All right, so with Tinh having listed out some of those possible cognitive distortions, which are usually the things that lead to controversial statements being made and are sort of a foundation of what causes controversy in groups and in discussions. So you might ask yourself, well, what can we do to manage those when we see them? So now we know kind of what to look out for. So what are some strategies we could employ? And that's going to come from exercising good and smart application of communication skills in the context of the group. And that's from you establishing and maintaining appropriate boundaries with the people in the group. You've established boundaries at the beginning of the class, and so it's up to you to enforce those and to model those good boundaries and communicate those to the group members. You're going to want to model and expect empathy and understanding between yourself and the group members. We should avoid judgmental statements. We should discourage others from making judgmental statements in the group. And we need to this is the big one, we need to be careful to make sure we validate the speaker whenever possible. Because what everyone in your group has to say, what you have to say, what others have to say is very important. And I think in our times, a lot of people are feeling unheard, unvalidated, and there's oftentimes a quick response, and we've gotten used to it. It's almost a kind of it's almost a kind of abuse that we do to each other on a daily basis, where somebody makes a statement, we immediately come back with a fast counterpoint to that statement, when we need to try to avoid that tendency to create that snap reaction. And so that's where validating the other perspective is important. If you had time in that group, you could probably discuss more in depth with that person why they formed that opinion. It probably comes from very interesting things in their personal experience that we need to be empathetic towards. And we're not likely going to know that at that time. We need to model and use techniques like empathetic and active listening. We need to actively be engaged and show that we are interested in hearing what the others have to say. We expect them to respect and listen to us as instructors and lecturers. When it's their time to speak, we need to make sure we respect that so that we can keep that active partnership of communication open. Using things like motivational interviewing and open-ended questions can help move your conversation along. Another important thing, and this actually sounds a little bit counterproductive to the things we just discussed, but we also need to know when it's appropriate to and use good cutting off skills as the leader. When is it time for us that person's time is up? How can we elegantly move that along and not offend people? That may be the first and foremost most difficult part of leading a group, is how do you cut off a speaker politely and move them along to the next thing? That is something we all have to develop our own personal style on. That is still the part I struggle with the most, and I think most other clinicians that I work with, that is a very hard thing to do. And that actually brings us as the presenter into the most uncomfortable place for a lot of us as the presenter, is properly cutting off and moving it along. We need to also, we talked a little bit, avoid imposing our own personal views and opinions, and to make sure that we are always validating others and welcoming contrasting and new ideas. If we kind of welcome those into the room when they appear, that sense of welcome rubs off and can be very effective at changing the entire attitude of that topic being addressed. We oftentimes in the practice of mindfulness talk about welcoming negative emotions when they enter into our lives instead of trying to shove them off immediately. If we welcome a negative, something perceived as negative, we can more easily use our intellect to welcome that and talk about it in a more calm and productive manner. So welcoming other and contrasting viewpoints, very important thing. And we need to normalize healthy behaviors and call out unhealthy ones when they occur. And again, that's sticking to our, that is being consistent in the enforcement of our rules and guidelines that we started off with in the beginning. So all these techniques all go back to us establishing a good groundwork, a foundation, a contract, if you will, with the group of how it's going to go and sticking with that. And the last thing I want to sort of say about running the group in the classroom, and this comes directly from my experience recently at WVU Student Conduct. I worked directly in the Student Conduct office over the last 2 years. I was there when we had to transition over into COVID, and it was kind of tumultuous, to say the least. It was a very interesting experience. And I got to work with one of my jobs within the Student Conduct Office was to facilitate group sessions with students with anger management issues. So that usually involved, most of the time, my being in a room or a Zoom room together with a whole bunch of pissed off, angry young men. Although I did end up with a group of females one semester who all were fighting together. And that was a very fascinating thing to moderate, because they all wanted to, even the guys, they all wanted to pull each other's hair out. So I had to really employ all of these things. I needed to get through that successfully. I needed to use the resources, the full resources of my institution. And that meant combining what resources we have in our student conduct policy, what resources we have in our student conduct offices, what resources we have available to us in our classrooms, what resources we have within our colleagues and inside each of our schools. Okay, and it was kind of confounding how often people did not and were resistant to combining those resources into a helpful model. So be sure to understand your school's or your organization's policies on code, different codes, and on student conduct. There's a lot of help in there. Don't hesitate to use student conduct referrals and get the help of a third party in there to help you to moderate these things. Ask for help and input from others. Consult with your colleagues. Consult with your students. Don't be afraid to use them as experts. They are the experts in their place. They are the experts of their environment and their experience. So we need to often ask them what's going on as well. Don't hesitate to address students at the private and individual levels, safely, obviously. For example, meeting after class at office hours, or meeting with the student with other colleagues, or a conduct officer. So often, one of the greatest roles the Office of Student Conduct served was mediating a understanding between a professor and a student who was having struggles. That was a very effective format. Also, always being aware of safety first and foremost. So if you don't feel comfortable meeting with a student privately at your office hours, that's where something like your student conduct officer, maybe your another colleague or the dean of your school or whoever it is at your institution that helps with these issues. And I think most institutions by this time do have a student conduct policy in order to help when things do get out of our group control. And they probably will. So I would encourage you all to be brave and to tackle these issues. We can do it with proper planning for the different scenarios that occur and employing different techniques and methods, I think, and not hesitating to look towards other places for other fields for insights. Hopefully, some of these things, this group model, I also wanted to point out to you that there is a deeper usefulness to the APA than directing how you write your academic papers. And the ADA has a marvelous website, actually. APA has a marvelous website with all kinds of advice on actually setting up and running groups. That's where a lot of this came from. The American Association of Social Workers also has a lot of these kind of resources available as well. I was surprised to see that how much the APA does have available right out there for public domain that follows a lot of these formats. I found it very useful in helping prepare this presentation. It was good and sound advice. So there's another aspect of usefulness to the APA to take advantage of. Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to stop you there so we can move on and address another topic that we thought might be useful to the group. Those all were very helpful strategies, but can you also speak to strategies that students on the receiving end can use to make themselves better cope with a potentially heated conversation? For example, if a student knows they're going to come into a classroom that day and talk about racism, and the conversation does become extremely maybe not out of hand, but it feels out of hand for that student because of their own personal experiences with the topic of racism. What can they do to help cope in that moment with those feelings that they're experiencing so that they don't feel like they have to bail from the class or drop the class or leave the room or shrink to a little person in their seat?
I think it's very important for us as the instructor to prepare for the discussion ahead of time. So of course, in our syllabus or agenda at the beginning of the semester, we need to let the student know when the discussions on certain topics are going to come up, and then I think we as instructor can identify which topic can be controversial, and we need to do more work for preparing for that. So I think to help students to feel more prepared or safe, comfortable when they come to the classroom, we can get their opinion um, about the topic first. And so we can send out an email or poll or a survey or so to just get their opinions, and um, we 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 can make questions in a way that we ask them about what they know or what they have heard from everybody around the topic, rather than asking for their personal opinion. Because if we form questions like that, the students, when they're answering those questions, they already form two sides of the issue. And I think it's very important to emphasize in the syllabus that we are discussing, like Matt said at the beginning, we need to set goals and objectives for just the discussion. So it depends on the discipline. It depends on your major or the course. So if like I'm teaching English and I talk about controversial topic all the time, but my focus is not going to be like you are wrong or I am right, whatever. The focus is for you to learn vocabulary, structure, and express your opinion, and that's it. So it depends on what your field of area is. It depends on what kind of class the students are attending. Then you can set up that rule right from the beginning, and those rules can actually help you to manage the class more effectively during the discussion. If students go on tangent sharing too much about something that are not really related to the goal of the practice, the activity, you have a reason to cut them off right there and gear them back to the conversation. So that's one thing. Another thing is we can always validate students. All of their opinions is precious, and we appreciate for their different opinions. But opinions are opinions. They're not the truth. They're not the reality. Which means that mindfulness is the practice that can help us to learn how to focus on the present and to help them to focus on the present too. So we can point it out to them right in the classroom if they feel frustrated that this is just your opinion. Nothing bad is actually happening, and even if they want to advocate for themselves or for their group of people, there need to be more preparation to be done on that. Solely themselves cannot make a big difference or a big change on the issue at all. So we can assure them that we are willing to have further discussion, to talk more with them after class, to address the topic, or we are willing to refer them to some other resources that can help them with their personal issue. One thing that I like to do during the time that I taught at WVU and also in Vietnam and doing group session is to have a referee. I don't know if a lot of people do this, but I find it really helpful for me. So I can ask somebody who is actually an expert in that topic that I know to be to just show up in the classroom and help me to solve the situation, because sometimes us alone cannot do it. Or we can ask for help from students. So we, through the survey that we get from the students, we can identify some students that can actually become like the judges, to listen to people and to help police the class, to cut off everything right on the spot, so that the atmosphere is going to not become very upsetting for everybody. Yeah, so those are some little tips that may be helpful for other people.
Okay.
Another
yes.
thing. Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So another thing that I think that I want to add up to the idea earlier. So students may just go on and share about so many things. So we can validate them, validate all of their ideas and write their ideas on the board, and we can have further discussion with them. Follow up discussion after the class and help them to. We can talk to them to see if they actually have any emotional issue. Then we can refer them to the counseling center or to somebody that can help them to actually to understand more of the issue and feel less frustrated.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tinh and Matthew. So the one of the things we really wanted to do is contextualize all this for everyone that has attended. So I'm going to let Nicole help lead this on. But essentially what we have done is collected some anecdotes of some personal experiences that teachers or faculty have experienced, but perhaps there may be some in the audience right now that would like to share an anecdote. So I'll let Nicole explain a little bit further, but maybe we can get some responses from Matthew and Tinh on as to how to handle specific situations.
Yeah, great. So thank you both to the speakers. I know I was like taking notes frantically, even though this is being recorded, but there's a lot of good material there. So one of the things that we really motivated us to start this conversation were like specific anecdotes or experiences in the classroom where we felt things got out of hand, or we felt ourselves upset, or we saw several students upset. So we kind of wanted to get your feedback on those anecdotes. And to all of our audience members, maybe if you feel comfortable, we'd love to hear like what anecdotes you have and then to get advice from our speakers about responding. But this is being recorded, so if you don't feel comfortable having your face and name connected to that anecdote, you can definitely private message me and I can read it for you. So I guess we'll just take a space right now and see if anyone in the audience would like to have an anecdote and to get some feedback from our speakers. Okay, that's okay. So as we continue throughout this, oh, go ahead, Ellen.
I'm willing to share, my moment of shame. This occurred decades ago, so I've since learned. But when I think I wanted to unpack a little bit further the really good moderating tips you had about how to be neutral, because I think there are also moments where we think as teachers that we're being neutral, but we're actually not. And what happened to I'll just say, someone I know, clueless, fresh, first year doctoral students, very little teaching experience. And it was a, basic public speaking class. And the student was giving a speech. I think it was on Malcolm X. And the instructor, when the Q&A happened, the student, was a student of color. The instructor was white. The majority of the students in the class were white. And so, like the students in the class had this really animated, and negative tinged reaction to her really excellent speech that was very positive about kind of the legacy of Malcolm X. And the instructor at the time in question, didn't come to the rescue of that student, recognizing later, much later, and much, workshops like this later, how to intervene. So I think, I would just finesse the neutrality and moderation with, think about also the dynamics, who was outnumbered in the classroom. And even if you have to play devil's advocate, rescue the student, help the student, because then it helps the whole class to understand things better. So that's just, the story of shame that I learned from someone I know. And that can be so helpful to changing the dynamics in a positive way. So sometimes sort of paradoxically being neutral means not being neutral. So I'll just throw that out there. Thank you.
Well, the story, Ellen, that you tell there really is an example of being able to practice empathetic listening in real time. To be able to identify personally and empathize with those students who may be in the minority or from a life experience that's not similar to your own. There is in mindfulness teaching that I use in psychotherapy, I've got a quote that I'll just sort of briefly try to remember and not say horribly, but it basically goes where we must, in our practice, we must learn to empathize with the prisoner, with the rapist, with the homeless, with the disenfranchised, with the list any other that you are not on there. So that's something we can practice in our own daily lives, is finding somebody who's completely from an experience that is not our own and try to put ourselves in and empathize and put ourselves in that person's position until we have tried to do that with everything in our experience. And then that quote even does go on as far as like, can you see yourself in the rain? Can you see yourself in the plant, in the soil, in the universe? So that's practicing deep empathy. And that's something that we each can do every day in our own self-care practices that can help prepare us for those moments in the classroom.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any other anecdotes or stories that the audience would like to share?
Actually, from the writing that you guys sent ahead of time in this list of things, I noticed a common topic that's a little bit tricky and difficult in the different responses here, and that was talking about anything that revolved around feminism or feminist theory. Sounds like that is something that can, and I've seen it. It happens all the time, where there's probably society, colloquial culture has developed a bias of a number of different varieties towards the word and the concept of feminism. And I specifically, in my new practice at the Morgantown Pastoral Counseling Center, I am specifically focusing in my practice on young men. Those are the majority of my clients, some young people between about probably 16 to 30. A lot of the issues that are coming in with young men is their conflicts with various feminist ideas and concepts, especially that they encounter in popular culture now, in the news media, in the classroom, all over the place. And a lot of our young men are feeling disenfranchised or not welcomed into the feminist world. And this is one of those spots where I've sort of have made the observation that somebody says something that may even be maybe perceived as slightly negative towards feminism or in disagreement with it. But really what they're doing is asking a question, but they asked it in more of a insulting or insulted statement because they don't understand and they may feel attacked by the whole concept. So I have found that empathizing with young men and acknowledging, yeah, I can see from your perspective, it's a hard perspective for us to put ourselves in. I can see, and I acknowledge, I can see how this feminist theory has felt like an attack to you. And so we talk about it very raw from that point. And we can usually come up with a pretty good understanding of it. Now, that might be a little bit of a risky thing to do in real context in class, but if you do acknowledge somehow that how maybe from a certain traditional cult of true masculinity background, which is where a lot of our young men are coming from these days, they're trying to conform to this narrow definition of masculinity. They're kind of trapped in there. Feminism kind of wants them to come out from that, but also there can be perceived that they're trying to be kept in a lane. So I have been finding that the more open I can make that in psychotherapy sessions, the better results I have. Then we can find out that there really aren't unaligned from feminism at all. So that I wanted to sort of talk about that a little because I know that's a hard topic to talk about. And so many of us who are feminists were very quick to make a counterpoint. And I find that being a little more patient with that on that topic is infinitely valuable.
Yeah, that's great.
Sorry, Nicole. I was just like, can I jump in really quick? I actually have a question about that because I completely agree with you. And just full disclosure, my area of study is feminist media studies. So, but I actually know somebody, an assistant professor, who had a whole group of anti-feminists sign up for her undergraduate level feminist theory course, specifically to stir the pot and cause trouble all semester. And it culminated with a desk being thrown around the middle of the semester. At which point they canceled the class because it was unmanageable. So the people who signed up from this perspective actually outnumbered the students who had signed up because they actually wanted to learn feminist theory. And it was very unmanageable. So I think we also do have to keep in time when these sorts of things are happening. They may still be somewhat rare, but they do happen. So do you have any advice? Now I'm getting to my question. Do you have any advice for when we find ourselves in these sorts of situations? Maybe not to this extreme, right? Maybe people haven't signed up specifically to like fight the feminist cause, but where they're really just consistently kind of aggressively pushing back against it and like no amount of mindfulness or critical empathy is sort of making a dent in that.
I would say that's the point at which you need to bring in help to create a intervention that was not just you alone. That is a very unfortunate circumstance to see to hear that a bunch of that a whole classroom full organized group infiltrated a feminist class specifically with the purpose to protest. That's obviously not the point of our class. That is definitely where student conduct and university policy needs to step in. That's where we need to rely on those other resources available to us. And if a student is, it's more likely you're going to have the one-offs, the one or more individual student that's going to be very combative there. And if it breaches the boundaries that you have set for the discussion, and it truly honestly does, and they are overstepping their boundary, that's when you need to enforce the rules, however you need to do that. And it may be student conduct, it might be talking with the student individually, mediating with the student with like a conduct officer or something. So don't hesitate to bring in those other resources. I think that's what we would do in the therapy office. If something was getting out of control in a group, that's when we would definitely discuss that with our supervision, with our supervisors, with our colleagues within the office, and we'd come up with a treatment plan accordingly to the circumstances.
Meredith, just real quick, I'm not sure who this person is and don't need to know, but my heart sank when you told that story. That's a profound story. And just to add to what Matt's saying, I would immediately go to my chair and say, I need you to come into the class, and we need to talk this out and set some ground rules for a positive path educationally forward.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, David. Just to be very clear, it's not me, it's someone in my peripheral world. But yeah.
Right. But my heart sank for them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was terrible. My heart sank watching it happen. So
I do think, just as an exercise based on that, hearing that story, it might be useful for us as feminists to ask ourselves, why is there a group of people wanting to infiltrate the philosophy like that? There are that here, but
yeah, we don't have time for it here. And I see Ellen's hand is up, but there are actually like far right and conservative think tanks that orchestrate this sort of behavior on college campuses, and also coordinate all of the like reporting your supposedly snowflake liberal professors and all of this stuff, right, for harassment. And you see, if you're a member of certain higher ed academic groups in online spaces, you'll see people be like, oh, so I got a letter from Turning Point today, or I got a letter from, the annual, like, reporting me for being like, the liberal professor who needs to be fired and taken down or whatever.
Yeah, I was just going to add, a colleague of mine once had to spend, I think it was about half a semester with a campus police officer sitting in on the class. And I can't remember what the dispute was about, but don't hesitate also beyond student conduct, just to call campus police, because none of that kind of comportment adheres to student norms, student handbook, student academic honesty, student behavior. So yeah, bring in the big the big backup sometimes if it's needed, I guess.
Ellen, just real quick, I wanted to say thank you for your disclosure. I've got lots of moments of shame, so I appreciated yours. And to Matt, I'm not sure if you're aware, but there are groups, such as Meredith points out, such as Turning Point, that are literally infiltrating classes so that they can trip up professors and call them out and demonize them, etc. I teach a class on activism in which I have my students do activism, and it has been very, very stressful lately to try to navigate this tightrope all the time. It really is.
It seems like we're kind of transitioning into the question and answer part of today's presentation. And so I think that let's just do it, right? So as we transition, I actually had a private question, and it's one that I was thinking about myself. So I'd be interested to hear from both of our speakers. One of the things that was really emphasized, and I could see a lot of utility for, was the notion that that instructors should be neutral. But one of the challenges that is coming up in my mind is that we have like specific learning objectives going in. And if I'm teaching a class for my intercultural class on race and racism, and I plan a discussion around that, I have a specific objective that, right, generally speaking, they say less racist things, or they incorporate some of that material. And so I'm kind of struggling in trying to understand kind of that back and forth when it's clear that like we should be less racist, if that question kind of makes sense.
My first thought on that, drawing from my experience with psychotherapy techniques, would be, so when we have a psychotherapy group, the point of psychotherapy is to change disordered thinking, okay, or cognitive distortion, so that we can learn a better pattern of thinking to help with our mental health and coping with stresses in daily life. So when we have a psychotherapy group, the goal is to affect change on the group. But here's the nuance in art to running a psychotherapy group where you're trying to affect change over people who may not want to or may not be ready to make change. And that is remaining neutral with those people as the moderator, as the psychotherapist, so that you don't alienate them from the possibility of change that you're presenting to them. That is where the art, that's where the science departs from the art. It's a great theory, but it's one of those things, well, that's great in theory, but then in practice, it's very hard. And it takes a practiced and skilled communicator to pull that off. So that's something that we talk about in supervision in the psychotherapy office. We talk about how to be that artist, if you will. So I don't have an easy solution for you there. But there are lots of discussions in the psychotherapy world, in the counseling and therapy world, about that very thing. Because we know that being a neutral party in there is key, or we will alienate the person or the group we're trying to affect change on. And then we just won't have therapy if we can't get the change in there. So we might, if you wanted to look up more about this, you would look up maybe change theory in psychotherapy. I think that's what we call it, change theory. It'll talk about the different stages of change, where you're in pre-contemplation, contemplation, where you're not ready for change, where you're maybe a little bit ready for change, you're thinking about it, then when you're ready, and then when you've made it, and then when you need to maintain it. So that does help shed some basic light onto the concept of trying to teach a change in a group that may be resistant to it. It's a hard thing to pull off.
I appreciate that. That makes a lot more sense to me now, the way that you're saying it. But it's open questions for anyone here. And you can also, message us private questions if you'd like any of the hosts or moderators to ask those for you.
As I'm sitting here thinking, last night I just got done teaching. I'm teaching interpersonal communication for the first time in many years. I hadn't taught it in quite some time, so I kind of forgotten about some of the things that we teach in that class. And I'm sure all of you are quite aware of perception checking and the pillow method. And that's where they go through 5 positions. I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong, and both are right, both are wrong. And the whole point of the exercise is to, try to understand the other perception. So I'm just sitting here thinking, I've been ingrained for quite some time in the 300 level classes that perhaps at the beginning of the semester, it would be healthy for a 300 level class to just go through the pillow method and a couple controversial topics just to get their brains reprogrammed in that mindset that this class is not about, butting heads or arguing. It's about trying to better understand the differing perceptions that everybody can have depending on their own life experiences that they bring forward. And so maybe, just as a thought, it could be helpful to bring back that toolbox from the 100 level classes as you're approaching those super hard topics in the 300 and 400 level courses.
So on our survey, we got like 15 respondents, and if you responded, thank you so much. One of the questions and sort of comments pointed out that it can be extra difficult, especially for people of color and women of color, to be considered neutral just based on how their body is coded socially. And so I was wondering if you had any advice on like this performance of neutrality or negotiating it, especially for those people who just by visual sight of the students might not be given that benefit of the doubt.
Well, again, my first thought on that would be to, from the very first time that professor, that maybe the minority professor, interacts with the class or interacts with the group, that they, from that very moment, and I think this is good for all of us, but this makes it even more crucial, that they are themselves modeling that neutrality, that neutral behavior at all times, being very, very consistent with that. When there's consistency in psychotherapy and group leadership, it rubs off, and it can be, it's detected sort of instinctively from the members in the group. So that modeling becomes really important. So that might be where it would be very important for the presenter to be very self-aware and say, okay, there is this, to acknowledge to themselves, yeah, there is this possible barrier here. So how am I going to deal with that barrier? And it's probably going to be a very personal decision, but it is something that we will all need to think about. I, as a gay man, always have to consider that. Women have to consider that. An intellectual man, somebody with a white man with doctor in front of his name, has to consider that these days. What biases do I just bring in here? Possibly. What cliches do I embody? Maybe just by the way I am. So that being more self-aware of that could help, I think, provide more insight into how to deal with that personally. I hope that's somewhat insightful. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? Does anybody else here have any experience with that scenario? Yeah, Ashley, I see.
I identify as Latina. I'm relatively young, and I'm a full-time instructor at a junior college where the majority of my students are Mexican American, or I have white non-traditional students. And for my white non-trads, it is particularly difficult to gain credibility. I had pushback from one individual all semester last semester, and it's like I was being scolded by a parental figure. It was every time she'd get a grade back, it was like, I'm disappointed how you're grading me. And it wasn't ever about her performance in the class. It was focused on my perception or me judging her because of her age or something. And so I just find it particularly difficult when, and I'm teaching fully on Zoom. I'm not even present in front of them face to face, that just my physical appearance is that intimidating to people that they feel they can lash out against me in that particular way. And so I try to remain as neutral as possible, but it's difficult when I feel like my credibility is constantly in question.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in a lot of circumstances, we may not be able to solve that every time. But over acknowledging that it happens and giving it thought and consultation and always actively trying to think and notice about it, we could maybe lead us to some solutions. Always look for solutions. They're always there. They don't always like to present themselves to us right away. In West Virginia, I often get in public meetings where anybody can come. I often get disrespected as how could you speak as a moral authority on anything as a gay person? And they won't respect you as that because you're this sinful thing. And there's not a whole lot I can do about that at that time, except at that time I'm aware it can happen, and I try to steel myself against it so it does not throw me off my game, so it doesn't catch me off guard, so it does not cause me to be an ineffective person. We should not let that be a barrier to us succeeding and being a useful person. So again, self-awareness and self-confidence. Always remember what you have to say is important. Yeah.
Actually, I had a similar experience when I first started out in 2008, which was right as everybody was being fired or laid off. And I'm at a community college as well. And I look very young. I still look young, but not as young. But I found that I had a very hard time building credibility with the students. I never did build full credibility with all of them, but I found the ones I found the ones that I could speak to. I just didn't know I could. And once I built that allyship with those, it seemed to follow suit with the other students. Just turns out my crowd happened to be the factory workers that had zero school experience and were as nervous as can be. And for whatever reason, I was able to connect with them. And it turns out they're my favorite students to this day. But at first I was seen as just this like little thing that didn't know much of anything. And then I had these 40 and 50-year-old factory workers coming in and almost overpowering things. But as soon as I kind of learned how to embrace and empower them with what they did know, things went a lot easier in the classroom.
Yeah.
Can I ask a sort of reverse engineering question? So, as somebody who does teach on complicated subjects, but also somebody who is an ally and a safe person for a lot of people on campus, I get to hear about other faculty members who are not engaging in learning and building skill in having safe classroom conversations. And I know that there are, and I do engage in sort of the official lines of communication to try to productively support our students, but I feel challenged. I never want to do harm or traumatize students when we're having those tough conversations. And yet I see my students being traumatized by some other faculty. One story I heard recently was of a faculty member, and I will charitably assume they were trying to open up conversation, but opened a discussion up with, you can be as racist as you want in this class. And so I wondered if you had any advice on sort of reverse engineering, supporting our colleagues, creating more awareness about difficult conversations and the fact that we as faculty can further harm and hurt students through our lack of knowledge or ability to navigate difficult topics.
Yeah, Tin, did you?
Well, I'm trying to think of the experience that I have had through my past job. I think it's a very personal issue from, because each person has their own experience in life, and that could lead to how they react and treat other people around. So I think that is uh, that is the reason why we have, supervisors and policies from the organization to make sure that the employees, the instructors, have professional, development and self-care and self-assisted, employee-assisted program and all that to help them get in touch with themselves and uh, heal from their past trauma, or to just learn how to stay neutral for their job. So I think the concept of mindfulness and self-awareness that we have emphasized and mentioned many times during this webinar are two things that people, everybody need to really get into. Yeah, 'cause sometimes people have extreme behaviors and they don't even notice that they're doing it. They're hurting other people and they're also hurting themselves emotionally. So we do our job well, but we also need to care for ourselves well also. So I think this is a policy. It's a policy of the organizations, depending on organizations. Several places that I worked for before kind of mandate the employees to engage in certain self-care programs. Sometimes they even force people to take a break and just take care of their own mental health. And they try to get perspective, opinions through survey, through students, through clients all the time, and based on those opinions, they would think of what methods or approach that they can do to support their employee and staff.
Melinda, I would say too, I don't know what university you're at, but the university where I did my PhD had the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning had a lot of really amazing programs for supporting different community groups on campus that you could individually go and take, but also if the department felt strongly enough about it, or if enough people advocated for it, it could become like a departmental activity that everybody does at some regular interval on the initial like faculty retreats and things. So I don't know if your university has a center like that, and if they don't, maybe you could reach out to some that do, and see if they would be willing to share their curriculum around some of these topics. So for example, they have one for military connected students, they have one for LGBTQ IA, they have multiple different ones, and I took them all individually, but I found them really useful to providing a safe space for my students when I was aware that not everyone was.
Yeah, no, it's really helpful, and I'll just add it's complicated by being at a smaller Catholic liberal arts institution that a lot of social justice interest, and then a lot of sort of like, whoa, that feminist word is super scary, never mind that you're a person of color or LGBTQIA or so. But that's a good suggestion, and thank you, Tin, too. I am kind of trying to be active in presenting these examples as I learn of them from my students, so that there can be a productive and positive growth pattern. But that's a great idea. Thank you, Meredith.
Melinda, a possible resource within the Catholic Church, I do pastoral counseling from the Ignatian spirituality perspective of Saint Ignatius. And when engaging with Catholics, if you kind of go to the Jesuits for a more liberal Catholic perspective, and also the philosopher and Thomas Merton is also very, very useful in helping sort out some of these things. And don't be hesitant to consult the Catholic social teaching. It's shocking when you actually go to read it how similar it is to the values in the social work field. With maybe the hardline exception on abortion, the whole thing reads almost verbatim. So sometimes in Catholic circles, I remind them of these things. Don't hesitate to do that.
At our campus, we have my incredible colleague, Lisa Hansono, gathered together a bunch of faculty interdisciplinarily, including in STEM, and applied for an Allies grant from the National Science Foundation. And it's administered, I want to say it's out of South Dakota State University. It's one of the Dakotas. It's either North or South, I can't remember, but just look up Allies, it's all caps. And what Allies did was it first trained faculty like me, and then we held workshops on various issues based on surveys of departments. And you could anonymously say like, hey, in my department, microaggressions are a big issue. Can you do a faculty workshop? And so then you request of the chair to set aside, part or all of a particular faculty meeting, and you run a little workshop with experiential activities. And it's been really successful, and they're always the curmudgeons who don't want to learn and reject everything. But I think it net does a lot of help also. The data seem to show if you can get administrators educated, they can change rules and mandate from above. And so you enforce behavioral changes, regardless of whether people think it's nice or not, they have to then make the change. So, and it's a student recruitment and retention issue. If you're alienating the very students who are paying your paychecks and they transfer to somewhere else in this, COVID world, which they're doing all the time, it's not the department either. So
That's exactly the point I was making to a colleague. It's like it's kind of a bait and switch. We're Benedictine, and so hospitality is one of our central core values. It is like you invite people to come into our community, and then don't create a loving community for them. So thank you. These are awesome resources. I really appreciate it.
Ellen, can you say the name of that resource again? Because I want to get a link and drop it in the chat for people.
Yes, it's Allies, ALLIES. And so it teaches faculty and administrators how to intercede on behalf of colleagues, students, staffers, on all sorts of intersectional conflicts that crop up all the time. Or how to, change rules if you're a department chair or a dean. Because, once you mandate things to change, people have to get on board, or they can be held, liable for, different ramifications. So, but it's a very collegial participatory process that's trying to push change both in attitudes and in trying to encourage systemic change, which is really important. Hiring, cluster hires. It's a battle. So.
Actually, Ellen, I recognize this Allies resource, and I believe at WVU I attended a seminar based on this that was about trauma-informed perspectives. It was very useful. I was going to mention that any kind of CE you might be able to get on trauma-informed perspectives might be a best bang for your buck in time. It's a simple kind of concept, but it's one we don't realize how intertwined it is in ourselves and the people we work with every day. So I might recommend exploring anything about trauma-informed perspectives.
I know we only probably have a few minutes left. I was hoping this topic would come up, but I just want to bring it up real quick. Obviously, healthy democracies demand rational discourse. And I've been running debates for as long as I've been teaching, and no matter where you fall on a topic, with a gun debate or death penalty or whatever, generally you're dealing with the rational on either side. But I feel like we've run smack dab now into an era of the irrational. QAnon, anti-vaxxer theories, election conspiracy theories, etc. And I'm just curious if anyone has any feedback on how to manage conversations in classrooms where people are very passionate about and propounding what I would call, I'm interested in this idea of cognitive distortion, but I'm very hesitant to label a student that in class or out of class. So does anyone have any thoughts on how you have or would manage a conversation in class that entailed what I would call irrational reasoning?
Hi, can I add to that?
Please.
Okay, hi, everyone. So I'm doing that this semester. I had a student in the past. I've taught on a couple campuses, so who's to say where it was or when it happened. But I've had students in the past who have given speeches where they filtered through my assignment and ended up delivering content that was incendiary in the most negative way about Jewish people. So, although it was very judiciously worded and everything. So I would just throw out there, the work I've been doing in the past couple of semesters has been on source evaluation. And I teach this in public speaking, so it's not like I'm talking about, a higher level theory class. And that is where I specifically initiate conversations about, this is not a public sidewalk, this is a classroom, this isn't talk radio, this is a classroom. Blogs are not peer-reviewed scholarship. And this semester, I've begun to add more specific, especially with the masks and so forth. Just a brief, like 5 to 10 minutes on anti-Semitism and discussing how a lot of these ideas are fruit of that poisonous tree. So literally just showing 5 medieval ideas, like how Jewish people poisoning wells translates to 5G towers cause brain cancer, which someone knocked on my door and tried to talk to me about the week before class began. And I just use that as a way to source evaluation, to talk about, this is our defense against ideas that we think we don't know what to believe. So that would be the way. That's my entry level. And that seems to be helpful so far, but I haven't gotten feedback on what the students think yet this semester.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I teach at community college, but we have many 4-year programs. So I am constantly teaching the Gen Ed, the 100 level public speaking courses. And I know that because we're on such a teaching focused institution, a lot of our powerhouse faculty have to continue to teach the 100 level, even though a lot of times the fun ones are the 300 level. But I found the same thing with what Andy's saying here, is that, really driving home, evaluating your sources in the 100 level public speaking courses. I've also been very disturbed here recently with what students think are good sources and are very confident in thinking they know, but really don't, and just trying to solve those problems at the 100 level courses and make sure you have good faculty that are highly aware of some of those serious problems that the 300 levels are experiencing is so important to give those students coming into college that foundation that they need.
Thank you.
It's hard to necessarily give direct insight into a solution for this, but from my perspective in the psychotherapy office, I have the benefit of being able to have the expectation that I'm going to ask you, the individual, a whole lot of personal things. So I can scrounge around in I can get more information there. I can find out what's going on the inside. And oftentimes cognitive distortions and disordered thinkings are from, my trauma-informed perspectives are very enlightening in that context. I like to try to understand my own culture in West Virginia, a very conservative, isolationist culture here. Collectively as a culture, we have a very low self-esteem. And that's because we have as a culture experienced ongoing trauma for centuries almost. And that has culminated into the way we are, and why we're resistant to change and why we're resistant to new ideas. It's a protective mechanism that we use to protect ourselves from something we see might be harmful. Somebody with that cognitive distortion wanting to argue with you in class may be seeing you as an academic. Maybe they're seeing you as intimidating or a threat to their very own fundamental human, to their spirit. And that spirit is oftentimes very much shaped by trauma and other negative things that happen to them, and they're doing this as a way of protecting themselves. I'm not sure how that's useful to your situation, but that is in the psychotherapy office. That's kind of where I come to this as an understanding. As soon as I can start to talk to that person about this as being a protective mechanism, suddenly we get places, and we can start then talking about how to make change and how to come to understanding. And it all happens with building trust with that individual. If I don't have trust with them, if they think I'm an outsider, if I have failed as a psychotherapist to meet that client where they are the minute they walk into my office, I won't be able to get to them. So that's even more hard to do in a group setting, and that's in a proper psychotherapy group setting, and it's going to be even more challenging in a classroom. But maybe that perspective can help, maybe that's insightful for you. I don't know. Maybe this is a transferable skill from the psychotherapy world that you could figure out how to use as a tool to inform your own solutions. So that's what I have to offer on that.
think it's very important to, I just want to add the small idea. I think it's very important to emphasize to the students or anybody in our class that, everything that we have in the classroom, to nature is just information and ideas and of a context. And technically, we don't know everything about it. Even if we bias on one side, we still don't know enough. But Matt is right when saying that it's connected with their trauma or their fear that something may cause their life to become miserable right away, right at that minute or after the class. So and also for you guys, you are instructor, you are teacher, you're not counselor or therapist. So whenever you have a talk with the students, we gotta separate, their ideas into, the emotional part and the idea part. So information at the moment is actually not really causing you any threat at all. It's just your fear. You're worrying about the future. So if you have emotional problem, I'm willing to refer you to a resource that can help you to rationalize it or to take action. But for me, I'm instructor and I know about this issue, but I don't know what to do with your emotions. So sometimes we need help from other professionals also.
Wonderful. Well, we're coming up on an hour and a half, so I think that's about how long we had allotted for everything. All of the questions have been great, and I dropped a link into the chat about some resources that I've been curating, and sometimes my curations are curations of curation, so there's like a lot of information out there to kind of build on all of the awesome tools that we got to today. I think that the organizers will be sticking around for a few minutes if you wanted to stay behind and ask questions, but if not, thank you very much for coming here and asking your questions. And if you have resources you'd like to see on the Google document I emailed out, you can just go ahead and email me. My email is on that Google Doc. All right. Thank you, everyone.